the United States has seized a Russian-flagged oil tanker in international waters, triggering an angry backlash from Moscow and reviving Cold War-era fears of a naval showdown. Russian officials say U.S. forces boarded the tanker Marinera at around 7 a.m. Eastern Time after stalking it across the Atlantic for nearly 2 weeks. Contact with the ship was immediately lost. Moscow insists the vessel was legally sailing under the Russian flag, making the boarding a blatant act of force on the high seas. The Russian Foreign Ministry has issued an urgent demand: ensure the humane treatment of Russian citizens on board and allow their immediate return home. Russia's Transport Ministry says no country has the right to attack or seize a properly registered foreign vessel, especially outside any national waters.
On January 7th at around 15 o'clock Moscow time, in the open sea beyond the territorial waters of any state, U.S. naval forces boarded the vessel. Communication with the ship was subsequently lost. In accordance with the provisions of the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, the high seas are governed by the principle of freedom of navigation, and no state has the right to use force against vessels duly registered under the jurisdiction of other states.
The language from Moscow is incendiary. Leonid Slutsky, head of the State Duma's International Affairs Committee, has branded the seizure 21st century piracy and a violation of UN maritime conventions, according to TASS. Russian military vessels, including a submarine, were operating nearby, a detail that underscores how close this came to a dangerous escalation. Washington flatly rejects Russia's claim. The White House says the tanker was operating under a false flag, tied to Venezuelan oil shipments meant to evade sanctions. The U.S. Coast Guard now controls the ship, which could be taken into British waters, pulling allies deeper into the crisis.
The vessel this morning was seized in the North Atlantic pursuant to a warrant issued by a U.S. federal court after being tracked. And this was a Venezuelan shadow fleet vessel that has transported sanctioned oil. And the United States of America, under this president, is not going to tolerate that. I would also just add the vessel had a judicial seizure order and the crew, so that means the crew is now subject to prosecution for any applicable violation of federal law, and they will be brought to the United States for such prosecution if necessary.
However, the British Defence Ministry confirmed that it has provided operational support to U.S. forces at Washington's request.
Our UK armed forces showed skill and professionalism in support of a successful U.S. interception of the vessel Bella 1 while on its way to Russia. This action formed part of global efforts to crack down on sanctions busting. The U.S. is the UK's closest defense and security partner, and the security of the North Atlantic is critical to both our homelands. The depth of our defense relationship with the U.S. is an essential part of our security, and today's seamlessly executed operation shows just how well this works in practice.
Originally sanctioned as Bella 1, the tanker reappeared as Marinera under Russian registry just as U.S. forces moved in. That move transformed a law enforcement action into a sovereignty test, with Moscow warning that any forced boarding of a Russian-flagged vessel amounts to aggression. With NATO aircraft tracking the ship and another tanker already intercepted, Russia warns the U.S. is rewriting the rules at sea and turning one tanker into a global trigger point.